So with that, I think we can start. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate taking the time out of your day to join us. I'd like to apologize for not being able to share my screen. I'm having lighting issues. So just to introduce myself, my name is Malusi Marule, and I'm part of the South African Sailing Council. And we pretty much, me and Lucy set up this session just to be able to better communicate with everyone. Before we start, I'd just like to run through a couple of things. Please keep your mics muted, just so that we can have a session that flows nicely without any audio feedback interrupting the session. And if you have any questions, there is a raise hand function where you'll be able to just raise your hand and you'll be called to ask your question during the discussion parts. With that, I'd just like to touch base. I think, the pandemic has asked tough questions of all of us. And for me personally, I think in terms of sailing, the question that keeps nagging me is, what does sailing look like after the pandemic and going forward? So with that, we're hosting this web series to create an opportunity not only of bridging the gap between the South African Sailing Federation and its members, but with sailing as a sport and the rest of the country, in hopes to really just inspire creativity through sharing knowledge and having a fat chat thereafter. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rob, who's our speaker for this series. Rob, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Malusi, and thanks for inviting me to share this with you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I've been running this series around the world, so it's new to me to have everybody in the same time zone. And it's really great to do this in South Africa. I must be honest, it's a bit more nerve-wracking for me because I know a lot of the people, so a lot more personally than I do with the other groups. But hopefully it'll all go well, and we'll be able to share some interesting thoughts. Just to let you know, I'm here to try and stimulate thoughts and discussion rather than to tell you what to do. I've got quite a lot of experience around the world on developing sailing with my job as the training and development manager in World Sailing. I get to travel to a lot of places and work with a lot of countries in developing sailing. So that's where I've taken this from. But it is really to try and stimulate discussion and thinking and hopefully action in developing sailing in the country, which is very close to my heart. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully that is going to all work. Okay, just to check, Malusi, is my screen all shared? Can you give me an indication there? Okay, I can see Anton, so he's saying thumbs up, so my screen's shared.
Anthony.
Anthony, sorry, Anthony. I'm reading half while you're on the sideline there. Sorry, man. All right, so let's get into it. What I'm going to ask is that we can get through the presentation first before you ask questions. But if during the presentation you realize there's a question that you'd like to ask, please put your hand up and then we'll get to you after the presentation. So this series is going about growing sailing, and which is close to the hearts of everyone around the world. And I'm sure you've all seen a lot of comment on how we can change and grow sailing around the world. I've divided this series up into 4 different webinars at this stage. And the first one is this one, which is creating access. And then the next one we will do is retaining sailors. So looking at creating access and retaining sailors. I believe that's the key to growing sailing. There's a lot of other aspects that we will talk about, like pathways and creating more opportunity for women in sailing. But these are, to me, the keys that run throughout all the other seminars. So why is access important? Well, firstly, we need to bring sailing to the people. People in the modern day don't have a lot of time. They don't have inclination to travel long distances over weekends because they have less time. So we need to try and take sailing to the people. This increases the market, it increases the amount of people sailing, and that increases the coverage sailing gets within the general market. Here we're going to talk about access, not racing. So when we talk about access, we are talking about getting people to have an experience of sailing and then teaching them to sail. Creating access requires what I'm calling a sailing school, but I don't want you to get confused between this and a big sailing school like we've got at our clubs. When I talk about a sailing school, it can be just one boat off the beach. We are talking about a place where people have access to learn to sail. So if we're going to set up a sailing school, we need to have a few things, and I've divided this again up into a few points. Firstly, the goal, dream goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, and we'll talk a bit about the goals the sailing school has. Financial models, money is always a big issue here, so we're going to talk a little bit about different financial models. We're going to talk about the market because it's important when we set our goals to know what market we are aiming at. Facilities, what we need to set this up. Staff, very important. And then equipment. We can't set a sailing school up without equipment. So let's first talk about the goal. We need to have a dream goal. We need to say, what are we here for? What's going to get me out of bed in the morning and send me to this place where I'm going to teach people to sail? That dream goal might be to have 1,000 people sailing in South Africa that I've added to the program. Or it might be that I'm going to have 2 people in the Olympic Games in 8 years' time. Whatever your dream goal is, that's an important part. You don't necessarily have control over your dream goal, but it is important that it is there to drive you forward and encourage you to get out of bed and make this thing happen. Then we have outcome goals. Outcome goals are slightly shorter term, but are still reasonably long term. But our outcome goals, we have more control over, and we should set outcome goals that we do have more control over. So, for example, my outcome goal could be in the next month, I'm going to teach 100 people to sail. That's an outcome goal. The outcome goal is built together by process goals. So what is the process I'm going to follow to have that outcome of 100 people sailing in the next month in my center? So process goals, going to a school to market the sport, going to a business to encourage people to come and sail and have a business day. Those are process goals in my outcome goal. Getting my boats on the water, that's a process goal. So thinking, what process do I need to achieve my outcome goal, which is working towards my dream goal? I believe every sailing center, every sailing school, and every club needs to go through this process of setting their goals. Otherwise, their success will be short-lived or not even get off the ground. Ooh. Right, so the important part is to have a plan. We need to have a plan. Set that plan up, work according to that plan, and always remember plans do change. So looking at financial models, I've divided these into 3 different models, and we're very aware of them in South Africa. The first is a fully commercial model. This is very successful in your first world countries like the UK, where you are selling sailing. That's all you do is charge people to come and sail, and charge people to come and learn to sail, charge people to become instructors, and the center makes its money out of teaching people to sail. That's where its income is from. Then we have funded models. A funded model is what I find most common in South Africa, where we are looking for funding from government organizations, from private sponsors, from clubs, from subs from clubs, that will fund the sailing activity. So we are not charging the people that are learning to sail to learn to sail. The funding is coming from other areas, not from the people that are learning to sail. Then we have combined models, which are also quite common in South Africa, where we are getting funding for a certain sector in the sailing group that we are teaching, but we are also charging another group of people to sail. So the most common area would be the combined model. We need to look at our market and decide which model we are going to follow. Just remember, if we are using a funded model, we generally need to pay for people to do sailing for their whole sailing career. So it is not a matter of introducing them to sailing for free and then them going out and getting jobs and buying their own boats. Funded models are reasonably restricted in how they grow the sport. Combined models, we need to have a market that can pay and is willing to pay for sailing. So we need to look at the area we're in. Am I in an area that has people that can afford to pay to learn to sail? Or am I in an area that is just very poor people who cannot afford to sail? Just don't undersell yourselves when you have people who can afford to pay to sail, but we want to get them involved, and we're so desperate to get them involved that we don't charge them. People are willing to pay for any service nowadays, those people who can afford it. If we look at piano classes, yoga classes, Pilates, all these things, going to the gym, people are willing to pay for this. So don't create a funded model for people who can afford to pay. Then going on to the market, we need to look at what market we are going to focus at. We might focus at the whole market, or we might select an area we decide to focus on. Now, I've divided the market up into junior, youth, family, and adult. Just to remind you, this is in creating access. This is not the pathway that they follow. So we need to decide, am I going to create access? Am I going to focus on teaching juniors to sail? Now, I call juniors under 12 years old, generally between 5 and 12 years old is juniors. 13 to 19 years old is youth. Family, self-explanatory, and adults is over 19 years old. So in the juniors, where we can find juniors to teach them is generally schools and clubs. In South Africa, we have a situation where there's a lot of schools that do not have access to sailing waters, so they cannot offer sailing. So it has been found up until now that the best method is to offer sailing as an outside sport, not as an official school sport. So this can be done through approaching the governing body who is in control of the sport in the school and convincing them that sailing is a good option for them. So primary school kids, if that's going to be where you are aiming, then that is the junior market. Remember that juniors are a lot more difficult to get into sailing. They're a lot more difficult to teach. It takes a lot more time to teach them, and they are put off sailing a lot easier. So if you decide to go with junior sailing, that is what you got to think about. Then moving on to the next level, youth, that is more towards our high school level. And there we are talking 13 to 19 years old. Again, we can go and look for these kids at schools, clubs. When I talk about clubs, I'm talking general sports clubs around the country. In some countries, clubs are where sport is done, not schools. So schools, clubs, and community programs, looking at different community programs that are teaching people various things, and we can add sailing to that. We can also look at other sports for people that we're going to attract to sailing. Very often marketing in other sports clubs is a very good way of getting people into the sport. Youth are much easier to teach, but they are much more difficult to keep engaged. When we start looking at teenagers, they generally don't stay on one thing for very long. So we've got to be very creative in how we keep them in the sport and in sailing. But as an access, getting youth involved, and so teenagers involved and encouraging them to try it is a lot easier. They are a lot easier to teach because they're more confident, and they don't scare off so as easy as the juniors. Then looking at families, I really believe that worldwide family is an area that needs to be exploited in sailing. Sailing is one of very few sports where a family can compete as a family against other families, or individually, father against son, father against daughter, mother against the rest of the family, or father and daughter against mother and son, or whatever the case may be. But there's very few sports where families can compete against each other in the same sport. There's a trend nowadays with people not having as much time as they used to. They want to spend more time with the family. So creating a sailing environment where it is catered towards families getting involved, families spending time together as families and not separating the family. There's a definite market there. So again, if you're looking at your market, maybe you can aim at the family for this market. Again, schools, clubs, community programs, churches, anywhere where families get together, this is where you can market. So have a look, what if you decide on families as your main target market, then look where families get together. Look how you can market to families. Just remember, if we go to schools and our market is families, show it as a family activity. Don't show it as a junior or youth activity. Show it as a family activity. Then adults, again, obviously parents are adults, so they fall into this, but I'm more thinking of the unmarried adult. So thinking of people that are just out of university and they're developing their career, they're starting to get their foot into their new career, and they're looking for a sport to take part in. Golf has been very successful in this area, where the businessman is attracted to golf for various reasons. Look at how we can attract more adults, looking at access for adults and how you can create more access for these people in businesses. Another adult group that is neglected, especially in the access market, is retired people. Retired people are people who are looking back on their lives and thinking what they would have liked to have done. Now they've got time to do it. We can market specifically to retired people and think of the boats and equipment we're using to market for retired people. So business people, young business people that are just getting established, and retired people, I believe, is the big adult market, and I really see a market there. Then moving on to facilities, we need some sort of facility to run sailing from, and the very first and most important thing that overrides everything else is safety. Wherever we are going to run the sailing from, we need to make sure it is safe. We need to make sure it is safe on the shore, and we need to make sure it is safe on the water. We cannot be having media having an accident that they report on that is around sailing. That is very detrimental. The facilities need to be accessible. One of the big things around the world is that we traditionally do all training through yacht clubs. Yacht clubs need a very specific type of premises. Now, I'm not saying we must move away from the yacht club system. What I'm saying is that we need to take sailing to the people. There are a lot of resorts, golf estates, where there's ponds and small lakes on these golf estates, and it is within an upmarket environment. That is taking sailing to the people. There are places where there's suburbs with small bodies of water where we can take sailing to the people. Remember, here we are talking access to sailing. We are teaching the person to sail. When we've taught them to sail, we can signpost them to different places, like a club where they can go club racing, or the Val Dam where they can go and cruise on the Val Dam, or offshore in Durban or wherever, Cape Town, wherever they are based. But here we are talking about creating access, and there are hundreds of bodies of water in our cities that can be used for sailing. I know there's extra challenges in some parts of South Africa where security and water quality are a problem, and we need to think of those things. I haven't been to Joburg for many years except through the airport, but I remember Bruma Lake. Way back when, it was an amazing piece of water, but last time I saw it, I wouldn't want to put my foot in there because I think it'll come out without skin and meat. But so that, from an access point of view, is the perfect spot. But from a safety point of view, is maybe not a perfect spot. So think about bodies of water, and please focus on having access, not on the next step. How are you going to make sailing accessible to more people? Land-based facilities. Now, I know in the South African Sailing Training Scheme, there is a requirement for a minimum amount of facilities. But if we have a look, we can have public toilets at a dam as toilets, and we can have a small area where people are taught if it's bad weather. But if I want to teach somebody, I can take one boat and I can teach two people at a time on that boat. That might be the sum total of what I'm doing. They can shower at home. They can use the public toilets where it is. Let's get people on the water. Let's think of ways to get people on the water. It doesn't have to be a fully fledged training center. It can be a small operation that is just making sure people have access to sailing. Now, I'll come back to that because safety is a very key factor. And if we just say, let anybody just jump on a boat and start teaching, we are putting the sport and the people getting into the sport at risk. So when we talk about personnel and staff, then we'll talk a bit more about this. On the water, we don't need much. I think sometimes we look at the water and we think, oh, that pond's too small. Well, if we are just looking at access to sailing, it can be small. Obviously, we don't want them to be hitting the bottom with a dagger board all the time, or just get going and they've got attacked because of the bank. We need a minimum size. But let's try and think of what is that minimum size. Think of whether you can, with an optimist, teach kids to sail in a very small piece of water. And I believe we can go a lot smaller than we've got. The important thing is keep it simple. Our goal here is to get more people sailing, creating access for people on the water. Keep it simple and make sure it happens. So coming to staff. Firstly, and most importantly, I believe training is essential. I taught myself to sail, and I taught myself everything I originally knew about sailing. And I went and started a sailing school. And I know that I created some sailors that could have been very successful. I prevented them from being successful because of the way I taught them. There were small things I did that prevented these kids from becoming top-end sailors. We need to train our staff. We need to train our staff in safety. We need to train our staff in how to teach, what steps to teach, when to teach what steps, and how to make it a good experience for someone. So going back to the onshore facilities and how small the sailing school can be, I don't have a problem with some guy or girl who has one sailing boat and they are teaching off of a public bank or slipway and teaching people to sail. That's great. They're creating access. But what I want to see is that those people are trained. We need to be sure that they're giving a good experience. Otherwise, they end up putting more people off sailing than what they bring into the sport. And they open it up to an accident that can be fatal and that will really do the sport damage. So we need to make sure that people who are teaching sailing in our country, people who are teaching in whatever size of operation, are trained. South African Sailing has a training scheme. Make sure they get trained in that training scheme. Think of employment plans. How am I going to employ the people? If it's not just me running the sailing school, how am I going to employ people? Are they going to be volunteers, which is very common in a lot of clubs? And if they are volunteers, what am I offering to those volunteers? Am I going to offer them costs for their day? Am I going to offer them to develop themselves in training, so becoming internationally recognized instructors? Am I going to offer them free club membership? What am I going to offer these volunteers? How am I going to treat those volunteers? I cannot be asking volunteers to come along, but I'm a miserable sod and horrible with them the whole time. I need to make them feel positive about it and feel like they've got ownership in the training center. Volunteers are generally very passionate about what they do, and they're passionate about the sport and about people. That is why they become volunteers. We need to use that passion to develop the sport. Then what I call professional, it means people who are paid to teach people to sail. So if I'm going to go with professionals, first thing I've got to realize is that not all people who are paid to teach sailing are passionate about the sport. So I need to keep a close eye on how these people deliver the sessions. I need to make sure they are enthusiastic and they are doing their job properly. I would like to see more professional teachers in the country, but obviously that goes with how the scheme is funded and what is going on in the funding of the scheme. But professional, it means that these people you need to make sure they're trained and they are part of a structure. Don't just bring in anyone who says they can do it. They need to be trained people. Safety, as I said, safety overrides everything. We need to think about ratios. Now, the SAS scheme has ratios. If I remember correctly, we are talking 6-to-1 on single-handed dinghies and 6 people to 1 instructor, even on double-handed dinghies. But make sure those are recommended ratios. Those are ratios that are working and are good practice in other countries. There's ratios for 2 reasons, for safety and also for the quality of teaching that is happening. If I have 10 kids on the water, I cannot give them a quality experience. It might be a small pond of water and it's totally safe, they can stand, but I cannot give them a good experience. So I need to think of the ratios, what is safe, what can I as an instructor handle, and secondly, what can I handle as in the amount of attention I give to each student. Then protection of vulnerable groups. When I talk about vulnerable groups, I'm talking about firstly children. Children are vulnerable because of child protection issues like pedophiles and like people bullying and all this sort of thing. Make sure you protect the people that come and learn to sail from any of that. Also in vulnerable groups, I talk about girls and women, because so many girls and women are put off sailing because of the way they were taught and because of the attitude of the instructor. Make sure we protect vulnerable groups from being put off sailing. Another vulnerable group is people with mental and physical disabilities. We need to think how we bring these people into the sport and how we keep them in the sport. Then the legal issues. We need to make sure we are operating within the law. Don't think that an accident won't happen to you. We can hide behind all sorts of things with legal issues if an accident doesn't happen. But if an accident happens with you and you're not operating within the law, you have a big problem. Make sure we operate within the law. So create access, but make sure it's within the law. Right, now equipment, very sore point generally because equipment costs a lot of money in our sport. So we need to think what we are going to do about this. Firstly, our sailing boats. We need to tie equipment up, our sailing equipment up to what market we are aiming at. If I've decided to teach businessmen how to sail, it doesn't help us sit there with 6 optimists, because that's not going to be a good experience for them. We need to think of what equipment we are going to use for the market we are catering for. Make sure your equipment is in good condition. So what do we have? Look around your boat parks. There's so many boats lying around the boat park. Look what you've got and see what you can use to teach people to sail in. There's locally built boats that cost a lot less than internationally built boats. Traditional boats, we haven't really got so many traditional boats in South Africa, but if we go up north into Africa, your dhows and that sort of thing become very important in teaching. Old boats and new boats. If we are using old boats, think what is suitable. What can I use that is going to teach people to sail? So we've got a lot of old boats around South Africa. If we take a boat like the Flying Dutchman, a Flying Dutchman can be used to teach people to sail very easily. But if I get into the average Flying Dutchman, there's going to be a set of about, I don't know what it is, but it's a hell of a lot of ropes that I can pull that do different things to the boat. They're not necessary for the learn to sail market. So if you're going to teach with an old boat, make sure it's simple. Take out all the adjustments and controls and put in simple controls that can be used easily. Using the Flying Dutchman example again, think of how you can tone down the rig. So think of smaller sails. Maybe if you're on the Highveld, there's a lot of light weather. You might want to leave a full-size sail, but have the option of reefing that sail. But make sure the boat is manageable. Make sure that new people getting into the boat are going to be able to sail the boat without worrying that it's overpowering them the whole time, without making them scared. Think about the maintenance of the boat. Think that if you are using an old boat, we've got so many old mirrors around the country that are made of wood. Make sure these mirrors are not going to break every time you push the boat off the bank. People need to have a good experience. So think about how you can change boats. I had a discussion in the Caribbean about the laser. The laser is not a great teaching boat because downwind it's very unstable, even in 10 knots of wind. So it's not a great teaching boat. What can we do? It's a single-hander. Maybe we can cut the sail down, so make it a smaller sail. That helps a lot. Maybe we can put a little jib on the front with a eye hook on the mast and a little hook on the bow. You can hook it on the bow of the laser. The jib won't do much. It won't operate properly, but it gives you the opportunity of putting a second person on the boat, and two kids on the boat makes the boat more manageable with less mainsail size, and they can learn to sail. It's creating access and using what we've got. So what is suitable? It's a boat that is stable, a boat that is not going to scare somebody, a boat that is not going to hurt somebody, and a boat that is not going to break all the time. That is what is suitable. What is ideal? If we look around the world at the developed countries with developed equipment, we are looking at plastic boats that are simple. In the modern day, people want simple. They want a bit of excitement in the beginning, but not too much excitement. So look at what boats are around the world that are simple. And plastic really works because it is low maintenance. You don't have to go and repair the boat if two boats bumped into each other. Especially if you're operating on a very small piece of water, you might get boats bumping into each other. With a fiberglass boat, generally we get damage, so plastic helps a lot. So ideal in the creating access market, plastic boats that are very simple and can be depowered easily. So reefing sails, those are the best. Obviously, if we're on water like Knysna Lagoon, where there's a lot of sandbanks, a boat with a center board rather than a dagger board is good. Then looking at our safety craft, what safety craft should we be looking at? Well, firstly, the safety craft have to work properly. Around the world in the developing countries, there's a lot of boats there that it takes 2 arms to turn the steering wheel. That's not acceptable. Remember, this is a safety boat. It is there to help people. And you as an instructor want a boat that is going to work well and easily. Make sure that the safety boat is suitable to the waters you're going to use it on. On a small pond that's a bit about chest deep and is surrounded by land, you might even use a kayak. You might be walking through the water, but make sure you can cover safety properly. You need to get to the person very quickly if they capsize or fall out of the boat and solve their problem. If you're operating offshore Durban, Mossel Bay, Cape Town, you need something better. You need something that can handle the conditions. Remember, we need one primary safety boat in difficult conditions that can handle every condition the sea is going to throw at it. But for teaching, we can have more boats that are not as suitable. They mustn't be able to sink, but they can be smaller boats that are cheaper, that are running 5 horsepower motors that are being used to teach with. But we need a primary boat that is around that we can use if things go really pear-shaped. So think about what boats you need as far as safety is concerned. Look at your piece of water. Think we want to keep people as safe as possible and what is suited for that. I really want us to get away from what is the regulation. What is South African sailing saying we have to do? Rather, I would like us to look at the piece of water, look at the people and think, what can I do that is going to make this as safe as possible? If there's the worst case scenario on this piece of water, how can I make sure I can deal with it? That's what we should be doing. Other equipment that we need, buoyancy aids and life jackets. You cannot operate without buoyancy aids and life jackets. They are essential. So you'll need some buoyancy aids and life jackets. Make sure they're in good condition. If something's got tears in it, it opens the door for the buoyancy to pop out of the life jacket, and this can make a person drown. So make sure they fit properly. We cannot have people falling out the bottom of the life jacket. If they fall into the water, we need to make sure they fit properly and are in good condition. Other equipment, marker buoys, that sort of thing, there's no rules on it. It's not a safety thing. Make something that works. Put something together that works. If you, on certain pieces of water, you might not use anything, but I recommend always having some marker that people can sail towards. So in summary, just do it. We want mass participation. I know this is weird saying this in the middle of a lockdown, but we want as many people sailing as possible. Let's take access to sailing out of what we want to achieve in competition and all the rest of it, and see how we can make sailing accessible to more people. How can we bring sailing to the people? How can we create jobs in sailing? How can we make sailing attractive to more people? So just do it. Make sailing happen. But most importantly, above everything, be safe. Thank you very much. That is my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then we can hand over to Malusi for questions.
Thanks, Rob. Well, if anyone has questions, please do raise your hand in regards to the presentation. Perhaps I can get it started. I wanted to ask Rob, especially within the times we are in now, how is it that, how can we go about actually then making plans towards setting up a school during the pandemic for after the pandemic? Is there any insight you have in regards to that?
Yes, so I would be starting by looking at new pieces of water. So are there pieces of water that are very accessible, that are not being used to their full potential for teaching sailing? I think of Emerentia in Joburg. I think Emerentia can open itself up to a huge amount of sailing. And then once you've identified that piece of water, it might be through your local sailing club, then you need to identify what you need and set those goals. Firstly, deciding what you want to do, what are your goals, what are you setting out to achieve? And then secondly, going on to the market that you are going to be catering for. And just on the market, we so often are focused on kids. It is important to get kids sailing, and if my goal is to get champions in the sport, I need to be looking at getting kids involved. But the backbone of our sport is becoming more and more recreational sailing, and to grow our sport in recreational sailing, we need to be looking beyond teaching the children to sail. There's a huge market out there of adults that would love to learn to sail. We need to create access for them. So at the moment, Malusi, looking at what we can do, start off by finding out where you're going to do it. And then you need to go about the goal setting, looking at your market, making sure you've got equipment, making sure your equipment is in a good state, dealing with the people who own the water or own the access to the water, and then setting yourself up that you can get stuck in once we get out and can sail again.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'd like to just make a comment here. We talked a bit about Emerentia. I'm at Emerentia, and I think on the assumption that you have some access to some kit, the big issue really is not so much market. There's a market out there. The issue is gathering people to create a team of coaches and assistant coaches and people who are willing to instruct that can keep going in the long term. The big issue is finding the right cohort of instructors to actually deliver the process, because without those people, you're not going anywhere.
Yes, I agree. So often we want to create a huge big thing where we could create a small thing that is hugely successful. And the instructor I need to start something can be me. And that's all I need, me and a boat. If I've had the training and I started as me and the boat, I've started something, and I might only be able to do 2 people a week, but that's 2 more people into sailing. So I agree with you, putting the right team together is important, but don't let that stop it from happening, because very often we look and we think, okay, I'm going to need 20 people or 10 people or whatever the case may be. Where am I going to get them? Oh, there's no trained people. and the project never gets off the ground. If I'm not trained, go and get trained and start it myself. And so maybe the people you teach to sail will become your instructors. But we need to start. The whole point of this is that do something, get it going, and then worry about the team. I agree you've got a plan, but you can plan around yourself or around one or two people and then get it going. So good point. And just please don't let that be the barrier that stops you from making it happen.
Vernon, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, Rob, very nice ideas in that. Say I'm a one-man band and I want to teach a couple of people how to go sail. I'll get the instructors belt underneath me. I think what people should really know is what's a typical price that an instructor would charge a person to go sailing. In other words, is it a lucrative sideline little thing? Because at the moment, most of us, in fact, I think all of the people that I see are volunteer based. You know, I've taught lots of people to sail, but maybe the actual thing is if you're going to make some money out of it and you get more into it, what kind of money are we talking about income wise?
Yeah, good question, Vernon. Thanks. I think we need to do our research around the area. So sailing is very often aligned with horse riding. So what does the average horse riding lesson cost? What does the average piano lesson cost? Remember, we've got expensive equipment and we are giving people access to a very romantic sport, even though us in sailing sometimes don't see it as that. People who are outside sailing see it as this hugely romantic thing that is not accessible to them. So we need to keep that in mind and then think of what we are charging. I used to look at piano lessons and that sort of thing at around between 150 and 300 Rand an hour. And I don't think 300 Rand an hour is too far off. And I know in the sailing industry in South Africa, people think 300 Rand an hour, I'll never get that. But if you do your marketing and you do your structures right and you operate a professional organization, 300 Rand an hour is gettable. And if you take an operation with one boat that you are teaching 2 kids to sail on that one boat at a time, and you're getting 300 Rand an hour from each of them, for us who are professional adult people, maybe not so attractive, but for a youngster who's come out of university or come out of school, it becomes a very viable option to make some money. And then if you work within the ratios that you have 3 boats that can take 2 kids each, then it becomes even more viable at even 150 Rand an hour per person. So 300 Rand for the afternoon. That's very doable. So I don't know what the rates on pianos and horse riding and that sort of thing are in South Africa at the moment, but that's what I would be looking at to set my price.
Thanks, Rob.
Rob, Peter Hall here. Thanks a lot for that session, really insightful. Just 2 questions. Overseas and in the other, you're obviously doing a lot of traveling around and seeing different centers. So how do most of them operate, on a free basis for the sailing schools, or do they charge, and what sort of charges? First question. And secondly, of all the operations that you've seen globally, what are the 1 or 2 lessons that you think we should be really looking, maybe the top 1 or 2 lessons that we should be taking on over here in South Africa and adopting to really grow sailing?
Okay, so looking around it depends what area we're in. So if we're talking reasonably established countries that are sort of first world, that's all paid sailing. Everyone is paying. Even your countries that are not really first world, like Greece and these places, I must be careful, the Greeks might get me, but the places that are not totally first world, but are in Europe, and that generally it is paid sailing. So you pay to play. If we go to places that are less developed, like North Africa, South America is very pay to play orientated. Very little free stuff. In Asia, there's some countries that are free sailing, but generally in Africa, we'll see that it's mostly government funded to places like Algeria, Egypt, and these places that are reasonably successful. They are mostly government funded. But the general majority around the world are pay to play sort of. So I pay and I then get a service for that. Especially the entry level courses are all a reasonable on market value to what, like I said, horse riding and pianos and music schools. But then after that, there's a lot of clubs, situations where the club, you become a member of the club and the club owns the boats, and you then, in your membership, you pay a small extra fee and you get coaching and the boat on certain days for free, or it's not for free, it's included in your club membership. So that's quite common, especially in your European countries. On your other question on what key things, I firmly believe that access is a problem in South Africa. In most countries where sailing is successful, I would see sailing schools and yacht clubs, and that are, the yacht clubs very often are closed, but sailing schools are very open, and they're becoming more and more open and more obvious. If we're taking a club like Ziku Flay, an upmarket person who wants to learn to sail feels uncomfortable driving through Grassy Park to get to Ziku Flay. There's no problem, but they don't know that. They feel uncomfortable about it. Royal Cape Yacht Club behind the port's gates. It's fine as a yacht club, but it's not saying to the public, this is a place where you can sail. So if we speak to people around you, where do they go and sail? And think of yourself where you are. Where do you go and sail? If I had to learn to sail now and I wasn't in the sailing industry, where and how would I get into it? So I think for me, that's the biggest one, is access to sailing. And then a common one that's a problem around the world, and I think is a problem in South Africa, is the absolute focus on performance sailing. We all, once someone's done 2 days learn to sail, we put them onto a triangular course and get them to race around that triangular course. That's not what our sport is about. That's not what our sport is in future. It is part of our sport. And we need to realize that when a guy goes and knocks golf balls around the golf course, he's not necessarily been full-on competitive. Yes, some are, but not everyone is doing it because just to be competitive. They're doing it because they want to enjoy knocking the balls around the golf course. Cycling, people get out on their bike because they want to get out there and enjoy it. I did a talk, so I'll still do this on this group at a later stage, but on encouraging women into sailing. And in my research, I was looking at why do women do sport? And a couple of things that came out. One is for fitness, and another one is for losing weight, and another one is for social. So those were the three main reasons why women do sport. And I don't think men are very different to that. So how do we market our sport as a sport that can get you fit? Because the majority of Joe Public out there sees a big yacht with a cooler box and pretty girls on it. So what are we saying to our public of, hey, this is a sport you can get fit in? And then losing weight. Yes, sailing can lose weight, help you lose weight if we do it in the right way. And maybe we need to look at adapting the sailing we're doing to attract people who want to lose weight, but it's not over the top strenuous, like going for a run when you weigh 150 kilos, get on a boat and move around the boat a bit, you're going to lose weight. And then the other side is the social side. And I'm not just talking about the social of after sailing, of having a few pints together. I'm talking about getting on a boat with a group of friends and having a chat while you're sailing around the pond, whatever that pond might look like. So I think those are areas that are problems around the world, but also relate to South Africa.
Great, thanks.
Anthony, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, please. Thanks, Rob, as well. And it's nice to see so many participants this evening. And thank you very much for the time as well and sharing that with us. So one of the things that I definitely see a great opportunity around, and obviously a lot of people, even in this group tonight, have experienced VR racing and have played a bit with VR tools and VR sailing and things like that. And I think if I look at what the lockdown has done in my own family, in my own household, not just my own business, it's literally changed the way that we interact and the way that we participate in a lot of activities. We all know the world's never going to be the same after this. I think a lot of people are going to be thinking out of the box about using tools like Zoom, using tools like Teams, and using things like VR and VR racing, for example, to participate in fun sailing activities. Have we explored far enough two opportunities? One is really e-learning. My kids are in homeschooling completely, and they will never go back to a normal schooling system going forward. And they are the better for it, I think, but they lack the social interaction. But we need to explore these e-activities, these tools to actually teach sailing. A couple of videos, a couple of lessons online for adults, for youth, for aged, for families, and make it fun somehow, number one. And then when they come down to the club, they've already got some basic knowledge in them. So when you start talking about different parts of the boat, they probably know the boat off by heart, even probably better than what their coach will, because they've gone and they've re-watched the video a couple of times. The second thing is also, I think we definitely need to explore dry sailing tools and facilities. And when I say dry sailing, I'm now referring to the likes of a three-wheeler cart with a sail on it. There's other people that done at Zululand Yacht Club. I don't know if you remember, Rob, they actually built a little mechanism there that was like a little up here, and you put a sail on it. They had a little gate motor on it. It was really rudimentary. It was built out of wood, and it eventually started falling apart and broke down. But I think that was a fantastic tool, and we should seriously look at exploring opportunities like that, because that tool you can then pick up and take to school. You can have it in the back of a bucket. You could probably have two of them on the back of a trailer. And this way we could actually engage and get more people interested in sailing. I think when we don't have the easy access to the water, number one, because there's a lot of places around Joburg that has no water. So yes, you have Emmarentia, but out in the northern suburbs, there's no water. The closest one is Hartbeespoort, for example. So Emmarentia is great for a certain area in Joburg, and Germiston Lake is great for a certain area. And possibly there are other areas, smaller ponds, that can be utilized. But we need to explore the opportunity of building or creating dry sailing tools that we can use to teach.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I'm possibly a bad one to talk about this, because firstly, I don't, if I want to kill someone, I don't want to kill someone on the video game. I want to kill someone. If I want to drive a car, I want to drive a damn car. But e-sailing has, world sailing is very involved with virtual regatta, and virtual regatta has been blown out the water during this lockdown period around the world. It's really got huge. So I think that can be a tool, and I think it is a tool. I think your ideas on dry sailing are a tool. I just say, you know, what if you put someone onto that dry sailing boat and they think, oh shit, you know, this isn't really great, is it? And they never get involved in sailing. And your comment of where people do not have access to water. Well, I can tell you in this country, there's millions of people that are damn close to water that we are not touching yet. So my personal, and I know it's in contradiction with what you're saying, and I'm not saying it is the right way, but my personal opinion is I would like to see us doing everything we can to get people actually on the water sailing, because that is our sport. Sailing in a boat park on a landroll piece of kit, or even a blow cart, is not really what our sport is about. So there's enough people out there who haven't experienced this, who are close enough to water to get on the water and experience it. So that would be where I would be going. I think the e-sailing side of it has a lot more to offer to hopefully stimulate. The whole reason World Sailing got involved was to say, get a bit of stimulation going, and then the person will possibly want to become have a taste on the actual sailing. But whether that's actually done that way, I'm not sure. I look at the guys who have won the past two e-sailing world championships, and I'm pretty sure they've got absolutely no desire to get onto a sailing boat. So it's, whether it is successful or not, I'm not sure. So in my personal opinion, I really believe let's focus on getting people onto the water. We look at the areas that are close to water and look at that water and make it happen on that water. That would be what I would be recommending. Videos and that, a very good addition, but generally we find that people aren't interested in sailing videos until they've actually experienced the sport. And then so once they've been on a boat once, you can signpost them to very good videos, and there's a lot of them out there. But I think it's important to focus on getting them onto the water actually sailing before we start worrying about all these other areas.
Thanks, Rob. And maybe just to comment, so we wouldn't just be sending them links to YouTube or showing videos. I think we actually have to use the Teneo type school teaching process, I think. But I hear you, and I agree 100%. It might just be a way to generate more interest in our sport.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're totally off the market. I personally don't. I believe there's such a market out there for people that haven't experienced it yet. We can be focusing on these sort of things once we've exhausted that market, and then we'd be in a great place because there's a lot of people who haven't.
Okay. Sorry, was someone talking?
Rob, yeah, Kuba here. Good evening. Sorry, my connection is very unstable tonight. Yeah, I think one of the things to look at, I think there's going to be a huge thirst for outdoor stuff the moment lockdown allows us to get back on the water. And I think we should spend maybe a bit more time getting our ducks in a row, so to speak, so that we're ready, because I think there'll be two lots of people. One, a lot of people who are just going to go crazy and want to get out there and do stuff, and that's the people we need to capture. And then, of course, I'm sure there's going to be the handful of people who's going to be absolutely terrified to go out and possibly get infected by anything or everything that their mind sees. So, yeah, I think all your ideas were great. And yeah, maybe we should all work together and SAS also give us a hand with major marketing effort in the whole country.
Thank you, Kuba. Yeah, I think your connection's bad because you've been posting all sorts of stuff of you walking in the mountains when we've been trapped in our living room, so you deserve it. But Kuba, I think a couple of very important points that have come out of what you've said. Firstly, we need to be prepared. There is going to be a lot of people wanting to do outdoor activities. And as I've seen, I really believe that marketing to the families is going to be vitally important. They've become closer as families, gone through the storming sort of phases and now want to get out there and do things, but they're so used to the family being around. So market to the family, focus on the family. The other thing is your comment about SAS and South African sailing. And we are South African sailing, and we need to make this thing happen. It's a sport we love. It's a sport we enjoy, and we need to make this happen. If we sit waiting for South African sailing to do it, it's not going to happen as effectively as if we all go out there and we do it. I think getting out there, get whatever boat you can, get it on the water and get people sailing. that is our responsibility as sailors. Forget about the governing bodies and whoever. I do believe South African sailing has a responsibility towards its constituents in marketing and assisting, and a big one in training the instructors and creating that infrastructure for making sure the sport stays safe. But it's not South African sailing that's going to grow the sport in our country. It is you and me that's going to grow our sport in our country. And another thing is working together, you mentioned, vitally important. There's so much conflict between classes and clubs and what boat can and what boat can't. Man, if it's got a sail, get it on the water and get people sailing. That's what we should be doing right now. Later on, when we've got 2% of our population sailing, then we can start worrying about what classes are important and who's pushing this class and that class. But right now, we need to get more people on the water. And if a boat's safe and it's got a sail on it, put it on the water and get someone sailing it. That's what we should be doing, in my opinion.
Rob, I think I just have one more question. Just to delve deep into what Peter was asking, have you seen anything where clubs got their members involved in growing the sports in regards to perhaps having them teach or something along the lines, but having them be part of the growth of the sport?
Malusi, yes. The trend around the world is clubs are becoming weaker and people have less time. So the trend is towards pay to play. So paid instructors charging money to teach people to sail. Clubs and volunteers is becoming very difficult because people are working longer hours and battling more and more with how they manage their time. So people don't want to give their whole weekend away to teaching someone else's kids to sail. They'd rather be sailing out there with their own kids. So there are some areas where I've seen clubs that are reasonably successful, but it is mostly successful with volunteers, as you've put it there. But it's mostly clubs that are in very well-to-do areas that have a lot of money in their back pocket, and they just do this as a service to their members, rather than actually growing the sport through club volunteers. So the trend nowadays is away from the club, the traditional club. I call it the colonial club system, where the clubs were just fulfilling a service for their members and using volunteers from those clubs to fulfill those. Those days are very fast disappearing. So what I've seen is the focus needs to be more on charging people to sail and paying people to teach people to sail. And I think the clubs need to accept that. I think the clubs in South Africa are under a lot of financial pressure, and it's just going to get worse with the lockdown. So if we look at creating opportunity for a young guy to come in and use 3 club boats to teach sailing and make a living out of it, that's going to be much more effective in my mind than having the club trying to get volunteers to teach people to sail.
Malusi, can I just add one further point, more broader point, if we're done with this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good. So I just think, sorry to hijack this a little bit, but I think it would be also useful, just we're talking about access to get people sailing. Just to give a quick update on where we are with access to getting people back on the water, which is a key part of this. Firstly, how do we all get back so that we can go and train everybody? Obviously, we're going to level 3 on Monday. Thankfully, everybody is going there, which is confirmed today, which is good. They've talked about people for non-contact professional sports events, allowing that to continue with the approval of the Department of Sport. That we do not feel in South African sailing, and I think most sports are the same, that won't affect us at this stage. Our work has been done. Lucy and the team have done a huge amount of work with a couple of parties to see how we can move this forward and make sure sailing is correctly positioned to get back on the water. A key member in that, or key organization we're working with, is SAMSA. They control access to the waterways for craft. And we're in obviously constant discussions with them. In addition, SASCOC have set up what they call it's a war room, as they put it, the COVID-19 war room. And that is coordinating two efforts. The one is to coordinate amongst all the sports a concerted way about how we all get back to our sports, set criteria, and having discussions with the different government parties to enable that to happen. They're also looking at working about how do we free up funds for the different organizations that may need some access to funding. And so we're working with them, both of them, on that side of things. In the last couple of days, we've submitted quite a detailed plan around how we would like to see, ideally, sailing to get back into sport. It takes into account social distancing. It takes into account the nature of our sport. Some of our sport does social distancing incredibly well because it's single-handed, whether it's a windsurfer or a kiteboard or a dinghy or a keelboat. And some of them are a little bit more complex because you've got big crews. So we've put a detailed plan how we would like to see things move across the different levels and our sport to open up amongst that. It also takes into account when we would like to see district sailing, provincial sailing, and obviously national sailing enabled, and different criteria that will obviously need to be adhered to by clubs to enable this to happen, clubs, sailing schools, and even the larger boats around how do we do things. Clearly, it's in line with a lot of the government requirements on the COVID-19 situation. But as I say, that's been submitted. SASCOC are coordinating a whole lot of all the sports submissions. They all had to be in this week. They've been pulling them all together. They will then submit them and discuss that with the various government bodies and try and come back with a coordinated approach for each sport, and also the bigger picture of how do we open that up. I unfortunately don't see things opening up before level 2, even though we have put in application for some areas in level 3. I think, we still, if we look at the global picture, we're still unfortunately on the upward curve. And I think we've got quite a bit to go ahead of us. So we need to keep ourselves locked down, keep ourselves safe, and we need to bear that in mind. And, as I keep saying, this is not about just getting one or two elements of our sport sailing. It's about how do we get a whole sport sailing and get everybody in the country back to top economic condition, because our sports recovery is going to rely on the economy recovering. It's going to rely on all the people that we need and want to include in our sport being there post this event. So that's what we jointly need to work on. So I think for those that are concerned that SA Sailing isn't doing anything, there's a huge amount behind the scenes going on. We encourage everybody not to send legal letters and various things to the various ministers. Those are, we've been informed, not taken very well, I think, with the like words they used. So let's, work with the coordinated attempt. We're really working hard to try and get everybody going. We do understand the different areas of our sport have different requirements and therefore can open up slightly quicker than others, but I think it's going to be more of a coordinated opening. So sorry to Rob to do that, but I think it's quite key into growing this out.
Yeah, Peter, I think that was good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Momolezi, I see you raised your hand. You can go ahead, bro.
Just remember to unmute yourself. Huh?
Thank you so much, Malusi. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I just want to ask about, talking about creating access to the sport. I just want to find out about the disability. Is there any plans in place to recruit disabled individuals into the sport? Is any plans to get modified equipment or sailing boats that will accommodate the disabled individual to be able to enjoy the sport as much as we do? Is anything like that in place for the future of our sport? Thank you.
Malusi, I'm going to pick this one up first, and then maybe, I don't know, someone from SAS can, if there's anything from SAS's side. From a world sailing point of view, we are doing a lot to try and increase sailing for people with disabilities around the world. South Africa is a bit behind on my sessions. I'm on session 5 with the rest of the world, and next week I'm doing a session specifically on creating access for people with disabilities. But I know that South African Sailing has bought some boats for people with disabilities. I know there's a program starting at MAC as well in Cape Town that is for people with disabilities. The important thing here is that we have a lot of equipment that can be used for people with disabilities. Just looking at what is a disability, there's people with amputees who can sail most boats, and encouraging them to get into sailing. And then there's, on the other end of the scale, quadriplegics and people with serious mental disabilities that is more difficult. And there we've got the SAS bought 4 Hansas, which are small keel boats, and then there is the whole program around the SV14, which was developed in South Africa and is now one of the primary boats for people with disabilities around the world. So yes, I believe SAS is seriously looking into growing the opportunity for people with disabilities, and world sailing certainly is behind that. And we are trying to get it back into the Paralympics, which unfortunately it fell out of for Tokyo. And we won't be back for Paris, but we are hoping to get back after that. I hope that answers that part of it. I don't know if anyone from SAS wants to add to that.
Peter, I'm not sure if you'd like to add some more on that in regards to SAS.
Yeah, I think, yeah, very much echoes Rob's views. Is you know, disability sailing is a key part. We've had quite a lot of success around that and sent people to world championships over the last couple of years. Definitely, we want to increase the use of the Hansa boats that we've got, and really just build a more concerted program around that. Unfortunately, the disabled sailing is very reliant on volunteers, and they've got to be properly trained and things like that. And that's always quite a difficult area to get going. But I know up in the northern region, there's some really amazing programs that have changed people's lives, and that's a great thing to see, and we want to see more of that. So yes, very much on our agenda.
Sorry, Malusi, if I can just come in here. Lucy reminded me that of SAS developed, or with World Sailing and the US Sailing, have developed a resource for getting sailing for people with disabilities going. Maybe Lucy must just come in and say where it's available, where they can get it.
Hi, everyone. So this we've developed this manual. It's basically teaches instructors how to run a program and how to manage people as individuals and as sailors. It's a training guide. We have a shop online, and the book is available through our shop, which you can find via our homepage. There's an info icon which is red at the top, and you'll see the shop icon down below on that page. Thanks.
Thanks, Lucy. Vernon, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, hi everyone once again. I've asked Lucy just to share her screen. We've spoken about having the right qualifications to be instructors in that. So she'll just put up a little price list just so that you can have a quick overview before you log out. So I'm just going to hand over to Lucy just to put that up quickly. So yeah, Lucy, I think if you can just run with it.
Okay, sorry, it took me a while to figure where that control is in screen mode. Before I do this, I see Alfie has raised her hand as well. Just want to give her an opportunity to ask her question before we lose the train of thought.
Yeah, that's fine. Go for it, Alfie.
Just don't forget the mute.
Alfie, are you able to unmute yourself? Oh, okay, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
You're gone again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay. Okay. I just, on Momalezi's question about the program, the disabled program, Mossel Bay was also nicely on their way with this program, but unfortunately when we lost our premises, the boats can't really be launched off the beach. So we also have a program that we would like to get going here in Mossel Bay again. But we need better access to the water. So we're busy talking to the port to get that sorted. It's just now taking a little bit longer because unfortunately the yacht club premises is not there anymore. And that we haven't got a mooring area anymore to launch these boats. So I just wanted to tell him that that is also happening. So.
Thank you very much for that. Lucy, would you like to take over?
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Vernon's asked me to share this information with you. So this is just a summary and a reminder of what it takes to become an instructor and the investment that it's made behind it. So I don't know if I need to run through it all directly now that it's been up on the screen for a while, but I know the question was asked is how much should an instructor get paid? You know, this is something that needs to be factored into the process because it's a skill that these people get that they can use in their own personal capacity, and the instructors is something that is recognized in most countries around the world. So that gives them opportunities of having a career not just in South Africa but elsewhere. And then as you go up higher into the senior instructor, that's the ability to become an entrepreneur and run your own center. With that, you can kind of get going and do your own enterprise type business. Anyone got any questions around this? Great, thank you.
Sorry, Lucy, I've got a question or comment. Is if I'm a person who's interested in getting this going, but I can't take out whatever, however much money that is needed, does SAS help out? Is there plans that can be made? Because you know, we don't want this to be a barrier to developing businesses around this sort of thing. So maybe I don't know, must people contact you or must they just give up? Is basically what I'm saying.
No. Thanks, Robin. It's a very good question. So the way most of our funding is structured is obviously through collections of fees, and then we get grant money. And the way that the grant money is structured is based at national, regional, district level. So government's working towards getting a lot more funding going at a district level because that's where they feel that people can get benefit directly from it. So the way the funding models work is kind of nationals money is towards helping facilitate the programs run. And we're able to offer the prices you see here, which are actually rather discounted to what the true costs are because of that. And then at a region and a district level, generally the funding there allows for coach development and for the upskilling of individuals. So generally, by contacting the regional committees, you can then make application to them, or the district committees if those are in place, which is the case in Cape Town.
Thank you, Lucy, for that. I'd just like to take this moment to actually just conclude the session. So, sorry, I'm having troubles with my, okay, there we go. I'd like to thank everyone for joining. It was really insightful session. This is part 1 of 4, so there is still more to come. We'll be marketing the rest of the session. We'll be marketing the rest of the sessions as they come. I believe the next one is in 2 weeks, on the 11th, if I'm not mistaken. If there are any questions that you'd like to ask that maybe don't come to mind now and come to mind later, or any ideas that you'd like to share with us, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and please stay safe. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks, Rob and
everybody.
Lucy. Great evening. Thank you very much. Keep
Thank you.
well.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.